Homemaking in the winter. It's the season of warmth and blankets and supposed slow living, or is it? Some people see it as the coziest time of year, and I am all on board for the coziness, the hot drinks and the crackling fires and the long evenings wrapped in that soft lighting. But for others, sometimes homemaking, especially in the winter and in the cold, feels quite heavy, like it's an endless cycle of messes and meal planning and trying to keep everyone from climbing the walls. I've experienced both. I think some winters can feel peaceful and others can feel overwhelming. I'm in a particularly overwhelming season of life. It can feel that way sometimes, at least, with 3 children. The oldest is 3.5 and the youngest is 3 months. But today we're going to be talking about why homemaking in the winter can be a season of comfort or a season of exhaustion, and more importantly, how can we actually make that work? How can I make that work for you today? We're going to be talking about the one shift that's changed the way that I see my home, especially in the winter when you're all cooped up. And it's not about routines or decorations, but it is something a little bit deeper. I think sometimes in life, winter can feel like a retreat, like you're forced into slowing down, and I like to light candles, and we can enjoy those home-cooked, healthy meals from scratch. But for others, when the house feels, just smaller in the winter because everybody's stuck inside and chores can feel endless and the days sometimes feel too long. So what makes the difference? Is it personality, or the size of your home, or the number of people in it, or is it something we can create? Winter seems to naturally invite a sense of coziness, the slower pace and the quiet evenings, the way the home feels like a refuge from the cold. And for a lot of us, we want to love it. We want the soup simmering on the stove. And I will be sharing a very yummy soup recipe with you in just a few minutes. But we want those, and we want the soft jumpers and the feeling of being tucked in. But here's the thing, winter also creates more work. We have more mess, more meal prep. More time indoors means more reminders of what isn't done. You can see the dusty shelves and the unorganized drawers and the projects we said we'd finish, but we just never did. And that is definitely a thing in our old Victorian home. We have so many projects going on. A kitchen renovation coming this summer, before the summer hopefully. We're planning for that, and just jobs undone, skirting boards here, there and everywhere. So how do we balance it? How do we create the winter home we actually want to live in? So here's what I started to realize. I think the people who love winter homemaking and being inside during the winter aren't necessarily the ones with the biggest or the coziest homes. I think they're the ones who focus on what home feels like, not just what it looks like. I think that they're not chasing the perfect home. They're building rhythms that make home feel good to be in. So I did try something different. Instead of focusing on how my home looked, I started paying attention to the moments that made me feel most at ease, especially in the winter. And I noticed something. It wasn't the perfectly decorated spaces that made the biggest difference. It was the small things. The way that my hands wrapped around a warm mug drinking a cup of tea, or the way that the house smells after baking bread or lighting a candle, the feeling of the fresh sheets at the end of the day. And when I started to lean into that, winter homemaking didn't feel like a chore anymore. And it actually feels like something I want to do and get to do. let's just be real for a moment. There are, of course, obstacles. There are children who don't slow down just because it's winter. There's the never-ending cycle of home-cooked meals 3 times a day, and the feeling that there's always something to do. And honestly, some days I still struggle. I really do. Some days I want the cozy winter moments, but I get stuck in that overwhelm. And if that's you too, you are so not alone. But here's what helps. Instead of trying to control my home, I focused, and I do try and focus, on experiencing it. I let go of perfection, and I stop waiting for the right moment to light the candle or pull out the warm blanket. I just do it. When I stopped seeing these tasks as a job and started seeing it as a way to take care of myself, everything kind of shifted. It became less about doing everything and more about choosing the right things. Here I'm just using up some leftover berries that we had, defrosting it in the fridge, and I'm trying to make a low sugar, or at least a natural sugar, crumble for my children and I. My husband was out at work, so this was a perfect opportunity for me to try recipes that might not taste so good. I used to think that sugar was just a harmless little treat, something fun for the kids or a little pick-me-up in the afternoon, but I did start noticing the meltdowns in the children and the hyper moments followed by total crashes and the struggle to focus, particularly before we step into homeschooling moments and trying to get them to focus, but also not just in my kids, but in myself too. So we've decided to cut back, but not in a super strict never have sugar again way. We're just trying to be more mindful, swapping out the processed snacks for real food and choosing things that actually fuel us instead of making us feel sluggish. And let me tell you, the difference, it's huge. My kids are calmer, their energy seems to be more steady, and honestly, I feel so much better too. But it also has got me thinking about what's in our food in general and the preservatives, the pesticides, things I didn't really pay attention to before. So now we're trying to make little shifts. We're trying to choose more organic where we can and choosing simple whole ingredients. And it's not about being perfect, it's just about making choices that actually support our health. I think it's funny how something as small as food can impact how we feel every day. And honestly, once you start noticing it, you can't really unsee it. Speaking of homeschooling was something we always thought about, but actually starting it with our 3-year-old has been such a fun experience. And it's definitely not this big, complicated thing. At this age, it's really just about being together and reading books, exploring and asking questions. And honestly, that always learning. Whether we're counting while we measure the flour for bread or talking about colours while we fold the laundry, there are just so many natural opportunities to teach and connect. And speaking of bread. I've been making all our meals from scratch lately. Not in a look at me, I have it all together way, but more because I just started thinking about what we were eating. And I used to feel like homemade meals had to be these long, complicated recipes. But it's really just those simple things. The fresh eggs, the warm bread, the real butter and raw milk instead of the ultra processed stuff, and veggies that actually taste like food. And when I say simple, I really do mean simple. A loaf of bread, a few scrambled eggs, and some butter. That is a meal. It doesn't have to be so overwhelming. And also, you don't have to live on a farm or a homestead to do this either. I think sometimes we see people making these swaps and just assume that you need acres of land and a big pantry full of home canned goods. But honestly, you can just start wherever you are, just swapping out that one thing at a time. Maybe it's choosing better quality eggs or switching from ultra-processed margarine to real butter. It's in those little changes that really add up. And here's the thing, I am not perfect at this. We definitely still grab takeaways sometimes and have fish and chip Fridays. And there are days when I just throw something together because that's what fits in this season. But I have been realizing that it's not about doing everything perfectly. It is about paying attention to what nourishes our family and making changes where we can. So if you are in a season where homemade feels impossible, that is absolutely okay. Do what works for you. But if you have been wanting to make little swaps, just those little tiny things, it doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes the simplest food is the best food. But really, all of this, homeschooling and making nourishing meals and just being intentional about our home, it's made me think a lot about what actually makes a space feel good to live in. And it's not about having the perfect house or getting everything right. It's the small daily choices that add up. How we care for our families, how we create rhythms that feel life-giving instead of draining. So what about you? When you think about your home in winter, what's one thing that actually makes you feel good in your space? What's one thing you could start doing today? Maybe it's clearing off the kitchen table. Maybe it's lighting a candle in the evenings. Or maybe it's just sitting down to a simple homemade meal without feeling rushed. Whatever it is, know that it doesn't have to be complicated. The little things matter, and they add up to a home that truly feels like yours. There is something else, something that makes winter feel quite effortless for me, even on the hardest of days. And once I figured it out, everything changed.